Welcome back to the Steps to Soul podcast. Today, myself, Brandon Bourgeois, my co-host Christopher Sater, we're talking about the great debate: service-based businesses versus product-based businesses. Which is a better buy? And now more than ever, that field is changing dramatically with the introduction of AI, tariffs, interest. It's a fun time, right, Chris? It is a constant debate we see from buyers: what should I buy? But also how the market is evolving dramatically by the day, it seems.
Yeah, it's almost we're in the wild west of AI, and so we're kind of seeing a shakeup of how that's affecting everything across the board. I think all industries are being touched by it. It's hard to think of an industry that's not in some way, whether it's minute or just a minor amount. But yeah, we see service-based businesses and product-based businesses. I know that's what we're going to be talking about today, and kind of weighing the pros and cons of both. I think is it's a real question, And Brandon, I'll ask you this: when buyers first come to you, and they've got something in mind of whether they want a product-based business or a service-based business, what do you see kind of changing their mind once they kind of get into the details? I know we're going to get into that a little bit, but I just wanted to hit you with that right off the top.
Yeah, we'll do a little frame up here for everything else down the foundation of the episode. Really, it comes down to two major issues. Does the service-based business have a license? As we talked about in previous episodes, is that something you can obtain or willing to obtain, or it can be transferred? And then secondly, with the tariffs being such an issue in the last, year, is there a product stream? If you want to get into a product-based business, can you maintain getting this product? And is this product going to be phased out by some form of AI? And just for example, today in the market, I saw Amazon fired, 30,000 people the other day. I know UPS is cutting, I think, 17,000. But the CEO said, AI is coming. We are scaling back. We warned you. It is changing operations. So granted, we're not going to be selling UPS or Amazon. But the point is the big companies are already changing their internal dynamics, and that's going to eventually trickle down to our markets in the smaller level, Main Street and lower middle market businesses that we deal with, and what makes them a good long-term investment. Because for quick checkup of everybody, an SBA loan is typically 10 years for a business. So if you're buying this business, you're expecting a 10-year runway to pay it off. And how much can change in the next uncertain amount of time, that is to be determined. But we're going to talk about why buyers want cash flow from these businesses, what lenders want, as I just mentioned, predictability, and which ones are going to be scalable as well. With the invention of AI, some may lose different angles, but there are also being other angles to grow with scalability. Now, time is going to be saved, effort, consistency, AI agents. There's a lot of things in different businesses with product and service base that might change the game. And whereas maybe an investment a couple of years ago in different fields was great, maybe different for the other. I know it's a lot of vague language, but we're going to dive into it now. So for context, Chris, let's define what the two models are for everybody listening. Service-based businesses, that's your HVAC, plumbing, electrical, market agencies, IT, cleaning, and landscaping, something you need to pay someone to go do for you, a service. That can be even professional services like ourselves. What are we tied to? Typically, we're lower inventory type businesses. We go out and do the work. We have a lot of high customer interaction, right? We are providing a service, so you want to get to know us, trust us to provide that service to you. On the flip side, there's product-based businesses. You've got manufacturing, distribution. Speaking of e-commerce and wholesale, look how Amazon's coming to the market. We used to do a lot of smaller e-commerce and smaller wholesalers and retailers that sell products that got really pushed out the market by bigger retailers, and by AI now being able to set up fake AI accounts online to sell products. If you go on Instagram or any other major site, you see those ads, right, Chris? They're pouring in AI scripted, fake podcasts selling products. Like, I love this product. It's amazing how it's changed. But let me ask you this, just before we dive in too deep, which one, product or service-based, do you think is going to have a longer runway in the next 10 years? Or one that you would prefer to invest in, maybe?
I think service-based for sure. You're never going to be those HVACs and electrical contractors, IT, all that stuff. Everybody's going to need that, no matter what the case is. Product-based businesses, yeah, we all need certain products. But like you said, these tariffs have really kind of changed what we require in our lives. Hey, I'm going to pay this amount, but I'm not going to pay 200%. So if it's not being manufactured or it's too expensive and we can't even afford it, you're going to see a lot of those product-based businesses, either their revenue is going to decline or they're going to go away entirely unless it's just an absolutely need-based product. So to answer your question, I'm going to go with service-based. We're going to have those for a long time, forever, maybe. I can't see anybody till we reinvent HVAC, electrical, and the way we do
Mm-hmm.
IT stuff, those businesses have got to be around. So it's always a safe bet. Product businesses, it's got operational inefficiencies built into it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have supply chains, and then once those get disrupted, your business model is disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this, Brandon. What do you think buyers underestimate? How do they underestimate how operationally intense product-based businesses really are?
Absolutely. I think the biggest issue they don't comprehend when buying a business that's product based is they just expect that everything's always going to flow into the company the way it's flowed in previously. You mentioned tariffs as a possible issue, but the changing dynamics of where these products can be bought or can be competing against another competitor is the issue. But the beauty of these companies, though, is you can also scale them very quickly because as long as you have access to the product to sell, as long as you're willing to market and pump it out there, you can increase revenue pretty quickly in theory. I mentioned AI bots earlier. There's a lot of companies having these AI bots scan, scrape emails, pump out to sell product. And if you're someone who has that skill set, there's a great opportunity, especially if you can figure out your supply chain issues. We've talked to, what's the right word I'm about to say here? Companies that sell, promotional products, for example. We heard they had some issues with distribution, but once I get that figured out, they were able to roll and scale quicker for those who couldn't figure out, or smaller guys who couldn't get their product line fixed. The guys who could took market share advantage. So it doesn't mean that both are bad business models. I see long term, that's going to be more consolidated than trade businesses. I think you're going to see more of the product-based businesses be more consolidated. There'll be less local, smaller producers like that. You'll see more of an e-commerce takeover and spread through that region. Whereas, like you mentioned with trade businesses and service-based businesses, you need boots on the ground to go up there in an attic and fix the HVAC, as you said. Until we redesign how those components are working, there aren't going to be robots doing that or ways to do that. And you still need somebody to go in there and tinker and play with the wrenches to get those things fixed. That being said, are those as scalable as they were? Are you going to have the labor force? We know there's a labor shortage in those industries. So there are a lot of factors that are going to go into that. But let's kind of focus our talk now a little bit on buyer perspective. So what really matters to buyers? I think you and I could go on 1,000 different directions with this, but I'll kind of start the conversation here. For all businesses, but especially trade or manufacturing or product or service, it's reliable cash flow and transferability. And I think that's where product versus trade or service businesses is the biggest issue for most people. It's that transferability. We've talked about in other episodes the other kinks in the armor that occur there, but let's dive into that, Chris. What do you see it's going to be the biggest problem with service-based business and their transferability? To me, to kind of tee you up here, I think it's the fact that the labor and licensing issue isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. No matter how many people are told go to trade school, the common practice now is go to college. And that doesn't get you ready to go up in an attic and fix an HVAC or have a groundskeeping crew. We know with current immigration policies, that's shrunk that labor force, right? So how do you work around that? What do you do? What do buyers think about?
I constantly meet sellers who their biggest complaint is the labor pool in their area, their market, or you've got the older owners who constantly want to complain about the younger generation and that they just don't work and that they won't show up on time and all that stuff. The thing that they aren't looking at is you've got to turn hiring and training almost into a whole entity in your company. If you're in the plumbing industry, yes, you are a plumber and you need people who do plumbing and all that stuff. But you also have to have in your business model how to find new plumbers, how to train them to do what you do exactly, and then, qualify them. I met with a pest control company, a buyer. They're going around buying pest control. This guy told me they go out probably once a month and they will go find 20 applicants. They'll bring all 20 in. And if all of them check the boxes, even if they don't know if they're right or yet, they'll hire all 20. Literally, right then and there. They have that many trucks on the ground. And what they'll do is they'll figure out who's going to work out. He said half of them will leave within the first month to 3 months. Another 5 or 6 will make it a little bit longer, or they'll do something stupid where they get terminated. And he'll end up with 3 really good workers who work out long term out of 20. And that's kind of the business model. I don't want to say everybody has to do it that way. There's different ways to do it. But they understand that we've got 150 employees. If we're going to keep growing our company, we've got to figure out hiring. and training and doing all that stuff. And so in these trade businesses, you're not just that trade. You're also HR and all these other things that you got to do
And sales.
because your whole business model is built around labor. So it's not okay just to keep complaining that there's not a good labor pool or that maybe you're not paying enough. I don't know. But you've got to solve that issue because it's not going to go away. It's not like the 90s where somebody's happy to have a job and they're going to work for you
Stay
for
40
years
years.
and retire with
Yeah.
you. That's not the case anymore. So you've got to figure out this training method.
You're right. I'll give you a great example to parlay off what you just said. I got my roof at my house redone a couple weeks ago. The company doing it is rapidly expanding. Their training team is excellent. You can tell every employee and service and customer service agent who comes out to your house to get the job done, top notch. There is a plan, an execution, a philosophy, and you can see that trickles all the way down to what's going on. And even, I was talking to the salesman, for lack of better words, the guy that came and met me about my roof was like, yeah, we have these great training seminars. We're in there. Every guy spends multiple weeks getting into the full process, up, down, left, right, vertical, horizontal. And that shows up when you have issues or customer complaints or questions. They can answer a full spectrum of issues. And we talk about transferability. That's when a buyer sees real value. When he knows the entire team, the foundation is great. And that's why some people really want these service-based businesses, because when they're run right, and you mentioned this, the training and HR and everything is in place, and the way to keep recurring and bringing in talent is there, that is worth its weight in gold. On the flip side, with products, that's not really the case. You're kind of handicapped on that. You can't control if Trump throws a tariff on goods from China and you're an importer and wholesaler or a drop shipper. So you see some of those issues going on. Now, on the flip side, manufacturing, there's going to be a lot of interest there with the new regulations, the new push to bring American manufacturing back to the United States. We are seeing that now. Manufacturing listings getting higher multiples, getting a lot more interest. I'm curious where that will go, but you're also dependent on a couple of things, raw product and materials. And that's where also you still, as much as you can control your business, you can't control where those products, those raw materials come from at times. And that's where buyers, there will be more opportunity, but there's also sometimes a little more risk. But that's the game you have to play. The question there is, if you have to get financing, lenders are going to review that very, very staunchly and be very curious what the plan is going forward, backwards, and left and right. But there's still great access for them. We recently sold a lawn care company for $1.1 million. Lender got a little iffy on it, but got it all worked out. Great service business. Great corporate clients. Great, home service-based revenue. My concern, though, for those industries, and let's talk about this a little bit, Chris. Everybody wants the service-based revenue, correct? They all want the maintenance contracts in those fields. They all want that issue. I think a lot of buyers are overlooking the new construction and the non-service-based components, like say you're a mechanical contractor with the new plumbing or new HVAC installation. I see those businesses getting completely overlooked for the value they bring. Yes, it's maybe not as simple as the HVAC service, go up there, look on it once, turn a wrench once, write a big bill. But if no one's going to be in that space doing the new construction, that's all for years for the taking. And it gets you in the door. It gets you a license in the field, in the door. And if you want to go add service, go add service. Instead of competing as every Tom, Dick, and Larry to get the perfect service business, maybe go get one doing some new construction and then work into the sort. You've already got the plumbers, you got the licenses, you got the technicians, whatever that you want to call them, HVAC, electrical. Just get in there. And that'd be my advice to buyers. Sometimes just go get in there and learn and get the field and get the licensing if you can. And if you can't get it, make sure it's transferable.
Yeah, I would just make sure if you're going to enter that world, you keep it balanced. You don't need to go into new construction and it needs to be 100% of your revenue, and you're going after every new construction job there is, and you're hiring way too much, and you're putting too much capital into, having to get more trucks. Because I think their concern and my concern would be, hey, what if new construction stops? What if home prices start rising again? And
Housing
now
market has a problem.
Yeah, and now you've got all this capital. You bought way too many trucks. You got too many employees, which you can, what people do is they cut employees. That's the easiest one to do, to cut expenses. Usually it's the most expensive thing on the P&L. But yeah, everything needs a balance. If you're completely focused only on recurring contracts, that's great. But I would say that, going after a few new construction accounts, I've met sellers who they're just completely opposed to doing that. And I get their reasoning. But also, if it's going to stall your growth of your company because you're not going after new segments of business, That's something to think about. I'm not saying it's right for you or wrong for
Mm-hmm.
you, but definitely I know a lot of people who just made up their mind they're not going after that segment of business, and that could apply to a lot of different industries, a lot of different things. You got to recently had a client who had 60% on one customer. For had the listing for a few months, and we talked about, hey, what do you think about diversifying and going after? He just didn't want to go after and find new clients. He didn't want to try and diversify. He was okay with that. And then you already know this, but on December 31st, that client got sold to a much larger conglomerate, and they decided they're going to
Mm-hmm.
do their own business internally. And so that customer is gone. So, he had 5 or 6 months, not saying he could have changed his entire world in that time, but
But
he
still,
just got
every
to the
little bit counts.
yeah, he got to the point, well, hey, I'm looking at selling, so I'm not even going to worry about going after new clients. This is what it is. Well, now it's not that anymore. So, look at things like that before it's too late. You always want to keep a good
Yes.
balance in your business, whether that's vendors, customers, employees. Don't make sure we've talked about
Mm-hmm.
this time and time again. Make sure that all the knowledge doesn't sit with you as the owner or even just your number two employee. Make sure it's kind of
Concentrations.
diversified.
You're right. And speaking of concentrations, not just knowledge concentrations, but we see this a lot with the product and manufacturing businesses or product-based businesses, is an over-reliance and accumulation of inventory. And I think that's where a lot of buyers, when they're buying those businesses, see I think there's often a great debate, and I guess what makes it hard to sell or buy them is you come into these product-based businesses and there's an excessive amount of inventory. How much of it is dead inventory, right, Chris? The one that you can't sell or won't be used. We talked to a countertop producer. He had almost $1 million in inventory. The problem is 50% hadn't been touched in almost 6 to 10 years. Because obviously you cut the stone and you save pieces, but you've got to move inventory. And he's like, well, I got to sell this inventory with the business. But sir, no one's going to pay you $1 million with 50% of it being dead inventory. And I think that's an issue where a lot of buyers come into the market, want to buy these product-based businesses. They don't want the dead inventory. And the lender says, well, why are we lending on dead inventory? It makes a deal, it kills the debt service. And it's product taking up space and time and space in the warehouse. And I think that's an issue where we talk about transferability and we talk about concentrations. For product-based businesses, a lot of them bought a lot of product when it was cheap, and then the cost shot up. Well, then they tried to buy as much as they could before the price kept going up, and now they've got this massive sunk cost in product that makes the P&L and the balance sheet look a lot worse. And so it throws off the valuation and how to value it and how to handle the dead inventory. You and I've talked about dead inventory countless times for other deals. That can be almost the main deal killer for a lot of product-based businesses is owners want reward for that product they bought, but it's what's it really worth and nobody wants it. How can you even unload it as dead inventory? Can you even get anything on cheaply for it? Just get it off your books.
How many times do you have the seller that says, even on the dead inventory, well, we sell one or two of those still a year. They got, like you said, they got $500,000.
Custom order it. Custom order it.
Right. Exactly.
Don't keep it in the shop. You don't need $100,000 for something you sell $2,000 a year of. We see that time and time again. And also, I'll bring this up too, as far as, which one do buyers like to buy and sell? With a service-based business, that's not as big an issue. When a product-based business, for sellers out there, if your inventory and accounting of your actual inventory is very poor, you don't know what you have on the table to sell. A lot of times we go in these businesses and the owner says, I have $100,000 in inventory. We're like, okay. We start looking around the facility. You've got $200,000 in inventory here probably. If those are all, $10,000 a piece here, and you've got 2 full stock rooms of them. Just doing the quick basic math in your head, that's almost $50,000 right there. So you've got another $100,000 here, $50,000. You start realizing, does this owner know what his business really has available and what's factored into it? And buyers and that sends up a red flag to a buyer saying, if you don't have this lined up, I'm really scared to move too much further as far as paying a premium. Now, they may start saying, hey, there's opportunity here for optimization. I can get cheaper. I might get more inventory than I realize I'm paying for. But at the same time, that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's hard to define value there. And it creates a lack of, not good faith, but just you get a little worried. If he can't keep track of his inventory, what else is not being kept track of? What else is maybe not perfectly articulated on the P&Ls and balance sheets? When am I going to open this drawer and find out I got just junk? That does happen. We had one deal this year get lost because of that. Now, since an owner has gone in and kind of gone through inventory and reconciled it and moved some product out, and we're now got it under contract looking to close in the next few weeks. But it cost him 2 sales early on. And it was a wake-up call. It just was.
Yeah, what do you think the most difficult part about being a small business owner. And when you have one of these businesses that has a large amount of diverse inventory, whether it's electrical components or irrigation, large irrigation business, you got all kinds of different
Mm-hmm.
things. What do you think the most difficult thing about why is it so difficult to keep track of for the small business owner?
I think because when they first get started, like any good business owner, you hit the ground running and you're just trying to get sales. You're trying to build a company, to get revenue, to break even, to make a profit. And you're willing to sacrifice time and effort in different parts of the business to bring in revenue. And you start to process that way. You start your internal systems. But if you don't ever go back and really get a good handle on what you have and keep good records, because most business owners, when they start, it's, hey, that's a $100,000 deal. I need to go get that contract, or I need to go get that sale. They're not worried about the back end logistics part of it. Of what am I going to do with this extra inventory? If I'm off a little, I'll figure it out next week. You and I know that, Chris. You start putting it off, and it becomes the way it's done. And now you have to go back and try and reconcile at the end of the year. You may have all this paperwork. If you even save the paperwork or have it digitally saved, how do you line it up? Where's the SKUs? Is this in the right pile? Did I move it here? Did my worker who quit 3 months ago because he only started for a month, he was only there for a month and he moved on, and did he put stuff back in the right place? And it's a trickle-down effect. If you don't have the right systems in place and take time to go back and review them, ensure they're being entered properly, you may have a great bookkeeper. They may be keying something wrong just by accident, or copying the last person's work who did it, who didn't do it right because you didn't catch it. And I see that kind of spiral, and it builds and builds and builds. And the owners maybe know or don't know. In the back of their mind, I don't want to fool with that. I want to do what I love to do. I don't love digging in the toolbox looking for inventory. I don't want to go back in the warehouse. I want to focus on going to get those sales. I want revenue. I want to grow, because more cash flow means better sale price. However, if you leave those other parts unattended, you are setting yourself up for a problem down the road. Whereas a service businesses, you don't see that as much. Restaurants, you see sometimes in restaurants and other industries in that field, but for the most part, you know what's on your trucks. You know what's on your service vehicles. You have a general idea. It's not going to make or break your sale. But for product-based businesses, absolutely it will. Absolutely. And to answer your point, Chris, it's either not at the very beginning starting with a proper system, or not willing to spend the money also on the proper software to integrate everything correctly. And I think that's also an issue too. The business I just mentioned in the previous statement, his bookkeeper, not the best. Don't even know if they know what's really going on. They say they have an inventory sheet, but I don't think he's reconciled it in 10 years. You don't know if you don't reconcile, right? You just don't know.
That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of business owners don't realize you don't have to do this at the beginning. I get it. You're trying to keep costs minimal. You're growing revenue. That's all you're focused on. Getting product out the door. I get it. I think every business owner should recognize, or they should put something on a dot on the financial map of saying, when I hit this level of revenue, we're going to get serious about this. What's the plan? Am I going to bring in maybe it's a partial CFO, one of these fractional CFOs, as they call it, to help me get this started. Or maybe I need to upgrade my bookkeeper, because that's usually how it starts. Is the bookkeeper's there. They're doing payroll possibly, or they're outsourcing that. But what is a bookkeeper mostly concerned with? They're concerned with AR and AP.
And punching invoices in, getting invoices turned.
Yep, making sure I've got a business now. The guy he started in his garage, right? First year, made maybe $200,000. They are now doing almost $8 million in revenue, and they're still working off the same system and bookkeeping and everything that they were when they got started.
And that's not
I had to look at him, and I said, you've got to elevate your financial organization here. We've got to bring it. He didn't even have a CPA filing his tax returns. The bookkeeper was filing his tax returns. So yeah, exactly that. So my point is that probably at $4 or $5 million in revenue a year, it was time to bring in somebody who could
make
start
the next
tracking.
step.
Yeah, exactly. They don't even know work in progress. They don't have that. They don't have raw materials broken down. They just order, they pay the bill, they manufacture the product, and they get them out the door. And they're doing really well. They're making a killing. And that's kind of the problem, though, isn't it? Is that, and it's not just about selling your company. I know that as business brokers, we always talk about this as, hey, this is needed to sell your company. This isn't even about selling your company. This is about having good financial data so you can make good management decisions, so you can forecast a little bit better, so you can make, allocations for next year of how much product do you need to order? Do you need to start hiring more employees? If you don't have all that in the right place with the right allocations, for a product-based business
Mhm.
or a service-based business. That's
You're
what
going to
we're
get in
talking
trouble
about today.
eventually.
Yeah. So I think we got a little off topic there, but it's definitely a topic worth diving into for either base business, and exploring what that.
But let me talk about that a little bit, because you made a great point we haven't got to yet, but it checks into both the product and service based businesses. We talked about systems just now a little bit, having the right one as you grow. For buyers and sellers, this is going to apply to both of you, which is where it applies, I think, evenly across the board. Have the right CRM or bookkeeping software for your industry. There are ones built specifically for your industry, whether you're selling products and it's great for e-commerce control, Shopify accounts, or like Service Titan for HVACs and other commercial services businesses. Like QuickBooks does not work for construction. The way QuickBooks allocates everything, it does not work well for construction-based businesses based on the timelines and returns of all the AR and AP and the costs associated. So buyers and sellers out there, for sellers, have the right software that works better for your type of business. And consider this, and this is for you too, buyers, the software you implement, make it be the software for the big boy ahead of you. If you want to grow to be sold to somebody, a strategic or the really big player in the industry, find out what software they're using and integrate it in your company. That's going to make your company more attractive when it's time, one, to be sold to a new buyer or to a strategic. And for buyers coming in, if they don't have that software, that's what you want to find out and integrate over time, because that's going to make your business more transferable. It's going to make it more appealing, because data, in the day where data is everything, data matters, right, Chris? Like records, everything, transferability. If you use the same software, you're plug and play to the next big boy who wants to buy you out. That's what you want to have the option. If you have very conflicting software or minimal to none, that's going to be a reason the big boys or the next buyer leverages you and says, I love your company, but there's so many flaws in this area. I don't know if I can give you a big price because I don't really know what I'm going to get. I don't have trust or transferability guaranteed. We always say that word, transferability. If you listen to the podcast, that is the favorite word. The better software and the correct software for your industry and for the people in your industry who might be buying you out is the one you want to have in place or implement, because that's going to allow for a better chance of sale. And good buyers look for that as well. Especially buyers with maybe not the major industry experience coming in, Chris, right? They need a software that helps them understand the company and does the right procedures and right allocations for them. If you run the books by hand and you know the business and hey, my working capital is X amount per year, but you don't have anything to tell the buyer other than your gut feeling, you're handicapping yourself. And you're handicapping how a broker can come in and actually value the company too. So don't leave that on the table. And that kind of leads to the next point. Say you've got a buyer. Say someone's looked for trade or service-based business or maybe a product-based business, and they're kind of sitting there going, okay, I kind of know what I want to be based on my background, based on my skill set. I found one, but now I need financing, right, Chris? The big question, how do I fund the deal? The lender's going to look at these companies very differently. And with the recent SBA SOP changes, it gets a little bit harder. I think one, obviously, Chris, you and I know one thing. They want good proven historical cash flow records. If you have recurring revenue, that's really important and great, whether it's contractual or not. And I think you said best is the customer concentration issue. With good software, you can find out who your customers are and which products are your main concern. If you have those issues, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, it's going to make financing tough. And just understand, if you're in a service-based business, the first question the lender's going to ask is, can you get a license and will you get that license, right, Chris? And if that answer is no, or I can't, or I need the owner to stay on, you just made the deal a lot more complicated for yourself, right?
Yeah. It's licensing is a real thing. It's always been there, but it's even a little
Harder
bit
now.
more of a hurdle right now. The weird thing I see about either service-based or product, and more on the product side, is how emotionally tied buyers get to the business. They like it. They like the sim. They like the financials. They're moving forward. They're asking the seller great questions. They're diving in, doing their due diligence, making an offer. What I often see is they haven't even done the right steps of making sure that it's SBA qualified. Now, you and I, we always try to get our businesses pre-qualified, meaning, hey, the business isn't going to be a problem. It's whether you've got enough credit and cash down. But I see buyers get burnt out on the process because they're not taking the first step first, which is make sure this business is financeable. If the asking price is above a 5X right now with the way interest rates are, and you're looking to put minimum down, it is probably not going to work out. So that should be the first kind of thing you do is check the numbers, but not even check the numbers with the broker or the seller. is check your own numbers. How much cash am I willing to put down, and what can I stand to finance? What's the debt service ratio? And then when a banker looks at this business that I'm looking at, is it going to provide them with the cash flow that they need it, plus my living expenses for my life, my house and my car and every other debt obligation that I have on top of this business? So, you know, how many times do you see a buyer kind of get emotionally tied to a business and then kind of it just doesn't work out because of the math on the SBA or the financing path?
Happens all the time. The one I mentioned just a little while ago that had the bad inventory product allocation. We had a buyer that was so heck bent on doing that deal. Just had the bare minimum, made a lot of sense, but because the owner had a poor accounting system and filed taxes with poor accounting, couldn't go back and verify stuff, the lender said, look, he's on the fringe, had the owner file better taxes, we could do the deal. But guess what happened? And he just couldn't let go of it. It's like, man, you don't qualify. And for the changes that's going to need to be done, the lender just said, I can't help you. And it's frustrating to see that happen to buyers and sellers. But it's why all these different components do add up to a cumulative score that you need to have a good grade on. And luckily for us, this business isn't a specialty license or trade service where you have to have a specific knowledge to get. Because let's talk on that a little bit as well. Buyers fall in love with businesses. It's a big rush right now for buyers wanting to buy. Specifically, we talked about in previous episodes, trade and service-based business, like plumbing, HVAC, electrical. It's to go to, generic, boilerplate talk. But let's take it a step further. If you can't get that licensing, you don't have the background, and then you really want to be an HVAC. The problem is if there's not someone with that license, as you know, Chris, in the business that's going to stick around, you've got a problem because you can't operate. And if you want the owner to stick around and keep a percentage of the company to keep that license in place, they have to personally guarantee that no, they're keeping any percentage of the company, and that's a problem. So now, granted, SBA loves those kind of businesses. Why? Because they're easier to predict revenue. They're easier to predict the return. They're less susceptible to product fluctuations like product-based businesses, where most of the defaults that I saw last year and the previous years from the SBA were product-based businesses. They were companies that bought, like, for example, timber or lumber businesses, home improvement businesses that had products they had to buy overseas, wood and, nails and all those little products. The problem was their cost of goods shot up dramatically, and it really handicapped owners, especially just getting into the driver's seat. And let's tack on another factor. How many of those businesses where the cost of goods shot up really hurt their margin and their debt service? Did they know what they even had to begin with, right, Chris? Did they really have the right product? And they went back in that store and went, oh, crap, these nails are costing 40% more. I got building supplies. I got 100,000 nails back here. But shit, I have 50. Or, oh no, I don't have what I thought I had. Now I got to buy. Now I have to buy, and I got to buy at a higher cost. So I'm going to buy a bunch of them to survive. And then, like you said, the market for building dried up a little bit. We saw defaults rise at about 3.5% for SBA, which is still not much, but a lot of those businesses took a hit. So when you're looking about buying, buyers consider that risk on both sides of the aisle. I know you sold a building supply business. I know they had a little bit of a hump there to hurdle, didn't they, when those issues occurred? And it was completely out of everyone else's control, correct? Completely.
Yeah. On the lumber business? Yeah. Yeah, and that was a weird deal because that listing came before COVID, and then we kind of had to go on hiatus during COVID because it was lumber business. And man, you talk about prices shooting all over the places. Yeah, they went skyrocketing. And then, time went by, it kind of settled back down, and we were looking at selling the business, had a new buyer interested in looking at it. And lumber prices were still kind of going high. This was 2022. So lumber was at its highest post-COVID. Buyer bought the business. You talk about a weird inventory. You got a printout from the sales system of what inventory was purchased at, and then what the buyers. It's a commodity, so it's factual that it's not based on its previously historical cost. But you're looking at it as, hey, well, this is what it would cost now to replace it. Yeah, you got two separate columns there, and then what you're going to be selling it to customers for, and that's kind of, that was a definitely a difficult inventory to get through. And you got lumber. We had probably 7 acres of lumber out underneath sheds and stuff like that.
It's a lot to go through.
Yeah, it was.
No, and that's another variable for buyers to consider when you're buying those companies. Get someone to go in there and verify that information if you can. That's a good thing to consider. The same would go for equipment appraisal for any business in that service, as far as like equipment rental or digging or any kind of heavy machinery. There's a lot that goes into those factors as well. But that's one reason why SBA kind of loves those service-based businesses. There's often more heavy assets to collateralize the deal versus a product-based business that may just have a little bit of inventory, or if it's e-commerce, manufacturing. Those all play into it. And those factors, I think, you have to consider as well is the capital expenditure on those product-based businesses. If you're manufacturing like a machine shop, Chris, I know you're talking to one right now. The key things are, what's it making? The skilled labor, and how old's the machines, right? And every lender is going to ask you. You may have great cash flow, and those sell for great multiples, and they're highly collateralized asset loans. But if those machines are at the end of the lifespan, you could be looking at half the value of the deal being in replacing just the machinery costs very soon. So you have to weigh that into the value of the business. And that's where a lot of buyers get nervous is, I love this business, but I can't afford to do a $3 million deal and they got to spend $1 million in machinery in the next 2 years. Am I capitalized to do that? Or is the business going to grow enough or have enough income to help support that? Another issue often, and we're talking, product versus service, the service ones typically have a little bit less of that capital expenditure issue. But on the flip side, you've got bigger labor issues. Like you said, the pest control company, hire 20, hopefully keep 30. Harder to scale if that is your main core kind of impediment, your speed bump. Everybody loves manufacturing. Now, you might get a higher multiple for manufacturing and product-based businesses in some case. With the new flood in, I see those multiples increasing. But can they support the debt service, right? Doesn't matter if they're hot. If you can't support the debt, you can't buy it. It's a mute point.
You got to be careful. You got to be careful on those machine shops and manufacturing businesses because, especially if they ran their course and it's an owner who's looking to retire, he probably did not do a lot of capital investment in his business in the last 5 years. So the chances of you coming in there and getting brand new machines or even machines that are 2 or 3 years old is probably unlikely.
Low.
Unless they had to replace one to keep operations going. The ones I've sold, those machines are back from the 80s and 90s. They're making them last as long as they can. They've had some rehab, and refurbishment,
whatever it takes, keep them running.
Yeah, they're doing whatever they can to keep that machine going. Same way with the one I'm talking to now is, all these machines I've gone and looked at them and taken pictures. They're all from the 80s. There might be a newer machine if they wanted to kind of upgrade a certain product that they're doing. They had to go out and buy a new machine to do it. But you got to take that into effect. You're looking at multiples of cash flow for valuation, all that. The other thing you got to look at is how much am I going to have to put in to replace this equipment when it dies? Because it will die. It can't last forever.
It will. You're right. And that kind of leads us to a great transition here. Deal structure differences for these kinds of businesses. And I think this is going to be probably the most stark difference for what buyers and sellers have to consider. These service-based businesses, if there's licensing, transition, and training timelines, there's a longer runway there because there's so many different variables and scenarios you're going to come across. Every business has its variables you deal with in ownership. You and I both know that being in this business. But for trade and service, there's a lot of customer service relationship based and a lot of different angles of how to handle these certain product. Like my dad always told me, if you're going to buy a company, know how to do every job. But if I don't know how to go out there and fix an HVAC, or I don't know how to go out there and do a certain type of landscaping so that the water flows properly and the trees and plants survive, I'm not going to learn that in 2 or 3 days. I'm not going to learn that in a couple of weeks. That could take months to years of experience. And does the owner want to stick around to do that or have the key people, like you said, in place to assist with that? Whereas vice versa, if you have like a product-based business and I just have to learn how to run the Shopify account for drop shipping, that's a way different training and transition timeline and requirements and skill set level and knowledge base to entry level and knowledge base to get into. So how you structure your deal is also going to affect what you can pay, debt service, if any associated costs with having to bring other people in or keep key employees or give raises to keep the teams together. That is a huge deal with your deal structure, and non-competes, in a certain business, that non-compete's way more important. It's important in every deal, but especially in a service-based business where the relationship is made. When product, you need them, but let's be honest. People don't care which online site they buy their product from as long as they can get it cheaply, efficiently, and quickly. Whereas service, you want that HVAC company to come back out or that landscaper because they know your job and they've done it right the last 5 years. You don't want some random person showing up messing it up. What do you see as far as deal structure differences between those two industry, two different categories we've been speaking on, that you would say for buyers and sellers to keep really aware of, or at least I haven't highlighted, you'd want to put a spotlight on, is this is going to be a key differential, but also something you should prepare for now, because it could be the deciding factor for your deal.
Yeah. Service-based deals, they revolve around people, just like you said. I can talk exactly the pest control business the deal I'm working on right now. Mm-hmm. The buyer wants the seller, well, in his LOI, he wanted him to have each employee sign a non-solicit or non-compete before the deal was even done. Luckily, a broker's involved, myself, and said, we're not doing that before the deal's closed. We can do that at closing, but you've got to take that risk that this is going to happen, because we're not going to take a chance on disrupting the business, employees finding out this business is being sold, them quitting before they even know all the facts and kind of understand what's going on here.
You want to scare somebody off, throw one at everybody that same time. They'll talk. They will talk.
But that's not uncommon to see, is buyers kind of wanting that reassurance. What are they looking to do? They're looking to mitigate risk, because
ensure transferability.
In this business, these guys that go out and do the service work, they are the relationship to that customer.
They are.
Those customers don't even know the owner unless they've spoken to him for a complaint or came into the office. But they only know that guy. So buying a company like that in a service-based industry, that's exactly what you're buying. So you've got seller transition periods, you've got employment agreements, you got non-competes and earnouts. We've got that in this deal, is that, hey, we're going to pay you 75% up front, 25% is going to be paid in 12 months. After we see that revenue, retention. Yeah, exactly. So make sure it didn't fall off a cliff, and that all your employees left and took the customers with them. The other thing is product-based deals. They tend to shift toward balance sheet mechanics. You got working capital adjustments, inventory true-ups, supplier contracts. There's IP ownership. So all those different things that aren't really part of the service-based world. Yes. You've got you just got different risks that the buyer is going to try and mitigate. I know you've seen a lot of these deals, both on the service base and product, Brandon. What do you think, what deal structure tends to cause more post-LOI friction? Is it a service-based or product-based that kind of causes that little more headbutting and things that need to be straightened out?
A product base. And you think you said the best, working capital adjustments and inventory tune-up. Because everybody wants to calculate working capital a little bit different. We can go about the definition of it. You can Google it. No one can debate the definition, but how it's applied can be so subjective by some buyers, especially when you bring in seasonality and a large amount of AR and AP that's transitioning. Timing of the sale matters just as much as the calculation. And very often we've talked about this. LOIs will state working capital included to be determined at a later date. You talk about the biggest hiccup. Yes, because if you don't define it early, you can't define the walkaway value for the owner, and you also can't define what the walkaway in calculation at close is going to be for any reallocation of assets. And too often we see people just try and skirt around this and then want to fight over it. That should be decided very early on, so you can go over and do your diligence based on that peg or that number, what's going to be agreed to, how to fundamentally calculate it. And the same goes for inventory, dead versus good inventory. We see time and time again, those are the two places where overpaying and the disputes tend to get stuck. Because owners say, this is my typical working capital. And then buyers can, if I'm going to do seasonality, and they start trying to replay the math. We had a multi-million-dollar deal. You had fall apart because of a working capital issue, because the group just flat out was trying to stall the deal out through the seasonality period and basically steal it. We'll be nice. We'll call it that, but that's what it was. It was an attempt to basically steal it and screw the deal over and really screw the owner out of multi-seven figures because of the timing and restructuring, when we'd all agreed on paper that would have been done before that point, and the closing would have happened before that point, correct?
Yeah,
let's be blunt. That's what it was.
Yeah, and the definition of a line of credit that's used for working capital, they wanted to exclude that. So the words "to be determined later" in an LOI, that only benefits one person, and that's the buyer. It does not benefit the seller to leave that out there and not have that. I highly encourage anybody who's got an LOI and you're leaving any key fact of working capital or anything. I had one the other day. They wanted to go through the assets, and that was going to be determined later. No, we're going to determine assets right now, and you're going to tell us what's included and what's not included, and we're going to have that list. I know it's...
Put a baseline on there. Put a baseline.
It seems premature, To be kind of haggling over small items like that, it's not small though. It really isn't. I know it seems small compared to when you're dealing on a 4 or 5 million to be worried about which assets are included,
Mm-hmm.
but it's absolutely necessary because what happens is 2 or 3 months are going to go by. You're gonna, as a seller, you're gonna want to stay involved in the deal because you've been working on this deal. You've basically taken on a second job to get all the information together, and now the buyer is going to say they want this or that, and it wasn't defined in the LOI, and now lawyers are wasting time and money, and the deal's dragging along. So anytime it says to be determined in an LOI, I would highly encourage you to go ahead and define what that is.
You're right. And there are times where there may not be quite enough information to put a hard number or a hard calculation or just a very firm idea. But put the guidance in how quick you're going to figure that out. If you can't have it, put it, hey, we're going to get this resolved in the first 3 weeks after acceptance, or the first
Yeah, I
2 weeks, or
yeah,
and that's
I think
fair. And that's okay for buyers to want that. We're not saying that you can't do to be determined, but with a caveat to it, there needs to be a time frame when it's going to be resolved and agreed upon. And if not, then the deal needs to stop going forward because it's going to blow up again later anyway.
yeah, it may not
That
be
would
a
be my
hard number.
suggestion.
It may not be a hard number, but you can always put the mechanics of how that's going to be calculated, not just leave it
Mm-hmm.
open-ended and, determine what's going to be included in that number or not later. That's a bad idea.
I agree. I think it leaves too much ambiguity up for things to get disgruntled over. And as you talk and I talk about goodwill and transferability, when those start to fall apart, the rest will. And I know I said product business, we see that issue the most, but for service-based ones, as far as the biggest issue we see post LOI, if there's any kind of earnout, and I think I want to touch on this. If you're in a service-based business, say you're a doctor or a dentist or a single practitioner, you're going to probably have some form of an earnout on your clinic or your operation because you are the business. And same for CPAs, you are the business. If you are the main contact, and in reverse to your point earlier, Chris, the lawn care guy, the main field guy is the relationship with the customer. Reverse for the CPA, for the doctor, for the dentist. You are who the customer wants to see and know is taking care of them. That is where the trust is built, the medical history, the camaraderie. You're going to have to do some form of an earnout and a longer transition out of the business because of that. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get near the value you're worth. And if you don't want to do that, take less. That's okay. But just know that buyer is going to have a risk tolerance that is not as strong because of that. And so you have not to flip the script there, but that is something I wanted to highlight on too for people listening. Those are the two areas where I see the most friction because it sucks. Who doesn't want to get paid at close? But at the same time, if those metrics aren't clearly defined and allocated in the LOI and really kind of thought through, and as a buyer, you have an obligation to think that through too before you submit. It's not just on the seller to understand that. It's on you to think that through and get good advice for that. So when you submit it, there's a good chance you can actually execute on it. Because if you're just going to, like you said, Chris, TBD, 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 you are opening the floodgates for things to go wrong. It doesn't mean you can't have a correction if you need it. It doesn't mean you can't have a timeline to accomplish it before close, but they need to be shorter. Because otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money, time, and effort doing diligence, maybe getting the Q of E done, maybe getting some other legal work done to blow up over a very small factor that could have been decided very early on and been a deal killer, discussed and moved on from, or something the lender won't allow. If you're doing financing, you have to keep that in the back of your mind. Some lenders won't allow certain setups like that. You have to factor that too. If you don't address it, you're just wasting time. Point blank. Let me ask you this, Chris. What are the biggest risk factors that buyers underestimate? And let's talk about service businesses first. Obviously, I think it's not underestimated the risk of technician or staff loss. But I think the biggest issue is what do you think? I'm going to say quality control for me. I think quality control is the most underrated because if you don't know how the business really runs well, it's hard to maintain that certain level of efficiency without the institutional knowledge. What is your most underrated or underestimated key factor for buying a service-based business?
Yeah, I think buyers often underestimate how much value walks out the door at 5 p.m. every day.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is if you lose a key technician, you lose the manager. If the owner is the rainmaker of the business, all that goes away. Revenue can slide very, very quickly. And I don't think buyers understand that enough. You talked about licensing earlier. If licensing is tied to the seller or the key manager and they're gone, now you've got what you just said, inconsistent quality control. Those are going to be very painful for a buyer if they've just bought the business in the past 6 months to overcome. That is what you are relying on. And so that's why I see a lot of times these buyers putting in these employment agreements, these earnouts. They're protecting on the downside. They're hedging against this happening. They're doing everything they can on the front end, but you can't prevent everything. I
No,
sold
you can't.
a marketing company quite a few years ago. Buyer spoke to the number two guy. Number two guy was on board. He was all good. He was going to stay on board. He was going to become president of the company. He was going to take over operations from the owner. Guess what happened 2 weeks after the sale? Number two guy was out. But there were things in place to kind of help that. There was an earnout to make sure that wouldn't happen. There
Mm-hmm.
was a backup to the number two. So there was somebody in the wings that could take his job to a certain degree. You can never have that, ensure that in all places.
In all
But
aspects,
that's
but
the
yes.
that's the biggest risk is not understanding who works there, what their knowledge is, and how you need to retain them. And if you can't retain them, what is the backup plan for that? Going into buying a business, even with all those things, the earnout, the employment agreements, you need to have a plan in place when that falls apart.
I like your comment. The owner is the rainmaker. I think so often buyers don't realize how much, and owners don't too, realize how much they're really doing day to day, keeping an eye on things, just small little tasks that they do. They don't realize multiply and add up and aren't always easy to articulate. And I think buyers underestimate, I'm going to put a lot of work in. I've seen a lot of great buyers come in and work their butt off, but they don't really know how to perfectly emulate the seller. And the seller doesn't do a good job of doing things exactly how they did it when that new buyer comes in. They start doing it in the teacher mode, not doer mode. And sometimes the best thing a buyer can do is before an owner starts teaching you every little facet, just let them shadow you and see how you do your day. Understand what processes you did, your task, your thoughts, your schedule, how that worked. I think too often buyers want to just be told what to do and kind of learn like a school environment. This is not a school environment. This isn't learning on the field. Treat it like that, shadow, apprenticeship. Not, hey, how do I log into the CRM today? That's great to learn after hours or later in the day. But the main grind of the day's time, shadow, emulate, watch, pick up on the mannerisms, pick up on the skill set, pick up on what the owner's doing, walking around talking to employees or other tasks they're doing. Because that will lead you to different aspects to ask and learn from and small caveats of knowledge that the owner may not have thought to tell you, but will be glad you asked him and will help him elaborate and give you more institutional knowledge and transferability of what they've done. I know it's hard to define that in an employment agreement, but that's just better strategy, I think, underestimated. Because a lot of guys say, I'm going to work hard, and I believe they will. Working effectively is better than working efficiently. Efficiency is great, but if you're not effective in what you do, you're not going to get what you want.
Yeah.
What about product?
Yeah, you gave me
Go
the
ahead.
service-based ones. You take the product ones. What do you see buyers most often dismiss that they probably need to pay attention to when they're looking at a product-based business, and what do they later regret?
I think it's not knowing the real margin of every product. They look at revenue, look at cash flow, and think this is great. But you've got to know your margin on each product that you're selling and where the money is there. Because if you're going to start having sales or start increasing prices, where does the bottom line come from this product? And how much concentration does this product bring in revenue and frequency of revenue too? Like the lumber business you spoke about recently. Knowing what kind of boards sell for what, I think is a great thing to think about before you buy or understand getting into. Like, hey, why do we have $500,000 in inventory of these type of boards? And they bring in maybe a 20% profit margin, but we've got low inventory on the item that brings in a 50% profit margin we're not selling enough of. I think that's where buyers could get a better perspective of where growth opportunities can be, but also where to allocate their working capital and funds for reinvesting back into the business for growth and for inventory replenishment, especially if there's a bunch of dead inventory. Hey, if I have to buy this dead inventory from this owner, how much of that inventory can I get a margin on? So how much can I expect to even return on that? And if I can't figure that out, I shouldn't be buying the company because I'm buying dead weight and sinking capital I'll never get back. I think that's a great place to start and probably the most underestimated aspect.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. I had an electrical supply business years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You got to dig into those products because they had one product that was making up, God, it was like 75% of the gross margin. Everything else was kind of like being treated like a add-on or, it made a little bit of margin, but we're talking 5, 10%. This one item was like 60 to 70% because they had a special vendor. He was working great deals with them. They had control of this. They were able to sell it for a huge markup. If a buyer came in and didn't understand that relationship and didn't understand those margins, and then that vendor somehow goes away or that relationship goes away, that's kind of what we're talking about earlier. It's almost a customer concentration. It's vendor concentration. This business was reliant on that one vendor continuing to work with them. And you got to understand that relationship. Was it because the owner was there? Hey, if the owner is no longer there, is this vendor going to keep working with him, or is he going to find somebody else, another buddy in the area? So understanding those margins, not only just margins across the board, but
Mm-hmm.
product and vendor margins and things of that nature. And a lot of that's due diligence. You can't know that. You shouldn't ask those up front before an LOI is submitted. Those are, you can, but it gets a little tedious on the front end. A buyer coming in
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Hey, I want to know everything about this business, and I'm not even telling you what I'm offering or how I'm going to structure this deal."
Mm-hmm.
But you do want to find those things out in due diligence, and that's why you got to be ready in due diligence. Due
You're
diligence can
absolutely
be a
correct.
very quick thing. Sometimes it's 45 days, 60 days, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
You got a lot to figure out in a very short amount of time before you allocate a lot of financing, a lot of cash into this deal. Yeah, great point. Great point.
I think it's just it's very underestimated, and I think it's easy to overlook, and it can apply also to service-based business to some degree, like restaurants. What dishes are you making profit margin on, and why are you carrying a large amount of inventory for a dish you rarely serve? And I think it's tough to flip it, but just keep in context for both businesses. There's always places where that occurs. I think it's much more of an issue in product-based businesses because if you don't know what you're selling, what you make on it, why are you doing it? And that applies to all business, but especially product-based. If you're going to buy that product to then flip it, you've got to know what you're going to make on it versus putting your technician on the ground out there to go do some field work. There's more likely to find other work to do while they're there or add-on services you can make up revenue for maybe a lower profit margin or a loss leader versus, hey, I bought 500 laptops. I got to make X percentage to buy more laptops and cover my costs, right? Those are all great due diligence issues to look into. We could go on probably an hour-long episode just on due diligence, but we're not going to do that because that we've done due diligence before. But let's talk, I think, to finalize this baby up, valuation multiples. I think that's what everybody's probably been hopefully listening for or is curious about. Which service base or product base? I find services get a little more lower multiple because of the transferability to licensing. You can typically close a little bit faster, but man, those product-based businesses, Chris, they get a higher upside and they get a higher multiple. You get the right manufacturer with the right product and supply, you're going to get more for that than a basic trade service business because you're not relying on people going out to find these customers. Manufacturers, only so many people make this product. They're going to come to you. I spoke to you about one we have recently that has incredible profit margins, over 50%, that you would think the typical EBITDA range where they're at 3 or 4. He's going to get maybe 5 to 6 possibly because it's just so unique and niche and it's in manufacturing. Granted, there's more upside and risk, but the scalability is beyond there for what he makes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Premiums are driven by two things, whether they're service-based or product-based. It's that transferability we always talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And transferability comes from recurring revenue a lot, comes from having diversified customers, so not everything's concentrated on one customer. Having strong SOPs. We don't talk about that enough. But what is transferring with that is like, can the business be taught and, will this buyer understand it very quickly? And if you got to bring in new employees, some of the employees were loyal to the seller. Can you find new employees and train them quickly on the policies and procedures of this new business? You got to reduce that owner involvement. We talk about that a lot. Multiples, a lot of people think multiples are about growth. And if you're going to pay a high multiple for a business, yes, it has to be about growth because you got to scale into that, what you just paid for it. Right, exactly. It's more about survivability. So it doesn't matter whether it's a service-based business or a product-based business. You've got to look at kind of everything in a macroeconomic way and understand, are the tariffs going to affect me or is labor going to affect me? And that kind of determines the multiple. I've seen product businesses trade higher than service-based businesses generally over a long time because they've got some kind of tangible hard asset more so than a trade business. But I've also seen really good trade businesses, lawn cares, trade at a pretty premium multiple when they've got everything in place. They've got no customer concentration. They've got great SOPs. They've got great institutional knowledge that's been diversified throughout the organization. Now you've got great transferability, great survivability. And, I think that's when it comes down to multiples is all those facets and functions of a business really play into what that multiple is going to be.
You're exactly right. And I think especially with product base, often the owner isn't so important in the sense of they aren't the license like a service business. They aren't the institutional knowledge. The product-based business, the owner dependency is often a little bit less. Now, obviously their administration is important and maybe their few relationship with key customers, but as a whole, they don't hold the license or the key call to ensure the business can legally even function and run. So that takes away that transferability risk, thus allowing for a higher multiple to occur. And the obvious statement, compared to HVAC or plumbing, you got to have that license. If the owner has it, No one else does. That's harder. Whereas manufacturing of products, there is maybe no licensing there. So there is no risk of that owner being absolutely necessary to keep that license in place. You don't have to have that. You don't have to worry about getting that or transferring that or even going to get that license if you can. That's where defining metric on those 3 to 5 multiples when you look at a service versus a product, that's where I think there's the biggest gap is the owner dependency and that license transfer. Like you said, our favorite word, transferability, again, for those listening. If you haven't heard the 10th time today, start listening now. Because it's true.
I think if I were to ask you what's the one factor that consistently pushes a multiple higher, what would you say?
Owner dependency. Yeah. It's got to be owner dependency.
And I think that falls under
semi-absentee, or licensing. Those 3 factors in terms.
I think that falls under that word you just used, transferability. That's the factor. A lot of things flow under that. But if it's not transferable, I've had so many owners here in the past, even month, contact me, start looking at them, and just have to give them the bad news. Your business isn't transferable. You own all the knowledge.
Not right now.
Yeah, you only want to work 30 days. It's not that I can't sell your business. I can sell your business. But what you're asking, for what you've heard on the street is your multiple of cash flow of what you think your business is worth. It's not, because you're wanting to be out the door tomorrow. You're wanting to sell your business, and you are the business. I meet business owners like that all the time. And the key is to have a plan that's a little bit better from the start, but at the very least, 2 to 3 years before you want to exit, start diversifying that knowledge. Start bringing in people that you need to. Yeah, it's going to hurt your bottom line a little bit, but the choice is you're not going to sell at all. No one can buy you if you are the business and you're not willing to stick around because of your license, because of you've got.
Exactly right. We have that conversation every day as well. And it's the hardest conversation to have because there is cash flow often and there is a good business. But our favorite word, is it transferable? And that's where that tends to get hijacked and just, it hurts because you know that something there is there. But even if it is transferable and a buyer really wants it, then becomes the issue. If there's financing involved, now we've got a third party that's got to sign off on that. And that's even harder. So it creates multiple layers for issues to stumble to get the deal done. So just keep that in mind if you're listening. Whether you're product or service-based, it does matter. Diversifying your ownership requirements. It doesn't mean you have to be fully absentee, and it doesn't mean you have to be semi-absentee. But just don't overcluster your information and knowledge if you can. And if you can't, then understand that that's going to be a limitation when it comes to sell, and it may affect what you can get. It is the reality of deals. And look from the buyer's perspective. And buyers, and this is for you too. If you can't break that owner concentration of knowledge and risk down, you probably shouldn't buy that company. And fair advice. Because if you can't get it, what are you paying for? Something you can't transfer, something you can't put on paper as a tangible asset you own. You can't buy their brain. And you can't go in there and take all the knowledge and just transfer it. So that's a big factor you need to have prepared in your mind what you're going to do. Great effort, yes. I'm glad you want to come in and do something and grind it out. But how much can you extract from that person? And how realistic is it to extract it from them in a timeline that's available? I'll rest my case there. We see it time and time again. But take away our closing notes here. There's no universally better business one way or the other on these sides of the aisle. And unfortunately, lenders, buyers, company setup will dictate value for each one. Some may be better for other people than others. You have to know your risk tolerance, what your background is, and what you can apply to the table. But as always, look for transferability, know your risk tolerance, and understand that every business is going to have change with AI coming in different systems and ever-changing economy at rapid speed. So we're not telling you buy one or the other. What hopefully you picked up on today was there are a lot of key factors for both that you need to analyze and keep in perspective when doing so, and that will allow you to find the transferable asset you wish to acquire or unload. Anything you want to add to that, Chris?
No, I'd just say that neither type is better than the other. You really just got to fit the model to what you're looking for. Preparation, not the business model, is what matters most when you're looking at a business to buy.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well, on that note, this was the Steps to Soul podcast. We thank you for listening. As always, we'll have another episode next week. In the meantime, you can contact us, message us if you want us to talk about a certain topic, highlight anything on the previous episode. We are happy to do so, and we love hearing from y'all. I'm Brandon Bourgeois. That is Christopher Sater. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you next time.